But now it's really great to have somebody from the storytelling side come and visit us. So thank you again.
Of course.
And we'll make this a casual chat. Like I feel like that intro was way too formal, but
cool. I got my casual shoes on.
Awesome, that's cool. Yeah. So maybe we could just start. You know, we talked a little bit about your unique journey and the story around your own process to getting to where you are now. Want to tell us a little bit about, you know, that journey and what you're doing now and so forth?
Yeah, so my unique journey is that I started as a nerd, and I'm still a nerd. So so I decided to wear my R2-D2 shirt. Nice. Because R2-D2 is a good role model for short people who speak many languages. So I feel, as a short person who's bilingual, R2-D2 is my man, or my person, because we don't know what gender they are. So I started my career thinking I'd be a scientist or an engineer, because my dad is a scientist, and I wanted to just be a nerd, and that was like the closest access point. So I went to MIT, and I really liked it, and I like math, and I like science, and being a woman that says I like math and science wasn't cool back in the day, and I wanted to just kind of immerse myself in that culture. And I really liked it, but I found it was really isolating. Like, you know, I didn't want to just be in a lab or be behind a computer. I liked people, and I liked solving problems that were more than just, you know, in a lab or behind a computer. And I, not to say those things weren't good, because I saw my dad being this great scientist. It was just, there was a part of me that wanted that human connection. And so I did what most people do when they don't know what they want to do next, which is go to grad school. So, so I did that, and then I got to do more multidisciplinary things, and then I still didn't know what I wanted to do, and then I did management consulting, which killed a little bit of my soul, but it was good because I was exposed to business, and I was like, okay, maybe I could use all these superpowers in the business world. And I realized that meant making a lot of PowerPoints and Excel spreadsheets. But and then I moved into finance, and it wasn't just finance, it was like socially responsible finance and socially responsible venture investing. And it was there that I was like, it doesn't matter what the numbers are, it's the story. And I'll give you two specific examples. Like, if venture investors just did what was rational, like everyone was like, oh, we're very rational, we look at the numbers, we look at the business plans. If they just did the things that were the most rational and only invested in the best people, we would have a lot more women and a lot more people of color and a lot more LGBT people who are being invested in. So because we see that it's not a diverse landscape, it means that the numbers are not winning out. It means that there's a story that people are telling themselves, which is someone who looks like me or went to the same school that I did or is my homie or watches the same sports that I did, they must be the smartest. So there's a story that's not being expressed, that's still a story. And so when I was an investor, I was like, oh, okay, there is a story. It's just not being told. And so I was like, okay, well, how can I use this superpower to my advantage? And so I was usually the smallest person in the room, the brownest person in most of the rooms, probably the most female person, and I don't know anything about sports, so they'd be talking about football and be like, what yards did they receive in this round? And they're like, what are you talking about? And
sport ball.
Yeah, sport ball. And I was like, I can integrate functions. How about that sport? And so, and I don't really, I'm small. I can handle half a glass of any alcoholic beverage. So I couldn't like go out drinking with the boys or talk sports. So I would make them laugh and tell them stories, and they would invite me to their meetings and ask me to do deals with them. So for me, telling compelling stories leveled the playing field, and it got me invited to things. So for me personally, and in the macro sense of the word, storytelling was really powerful in terms of access and leveling the playing field. Not to say that that overcomes racial biases and other kinds of biases, but for me, it was one of my superpowers. And so it was clear that a charismatic entrepreneur, no matter what the numbers look like, could sometimes overcome those disadvantages by having a compelling story. So I'm like, I'm going to use storytelling as my superpower and humor.
That's great. That's awesome. And then how did you make that jump then from kind of venture investing and social responsible investing and impact investing to the world of media and so forth, and then into also media plus thinking about corporate storytelling and thinking about how storytelling drives organizations at some large companies that I know you've worked with. So.
Well, one was that I liked what I did a lot. I got to meet a lot of entrepreneurs. I got to invest in cool companies. I felt like I was making a difference finally. So it wasn't just I was stuck behind a computer and I wasn't doing anything. So I really liked these jobs. And I used my powers for good. And so it wasn't that I was upset or didn't feel a connection in any way. I just felt like I had something inside of me that was a different skill that I wanted to do something bigger with. And so another way of saying it is like I wanted to do something that I knew as an individual I had more to contribute in the world, that wasn't just because I was part of an organization or that I was working at a fund and there was lots of money behind me and that's why people wanted to know me. So when I left, it was really like, how can I make an impact that's because of what I have to offer, not because I'm associated with a big name or a big fund or a lot of money. And so when I made that switch, it was really starting over. It was like I did three things. I was like, well, one, I want to tell stories and I want to perform on stage. And that was just kind of for my own ability. Like, how can I, if I want to be a storyteller, I have to be able to do this on stage. And, I can't just do it in theory. So I was like, well, how do I do that? And you do it by failing all the time. So I did that. And then second, people would be like, well, you've done all this stuff. Can you come and teach us how to use storytelling and combine it with all the business stuff you've done? And I was like, wow, I know how to do business stuff, but the storytelling and comedy stuff I just started doing, I don't know if it's relevant to your business stuff. And they're like, no, it is. And then I'm like, I don't know. And then they're like, well, we'll pay you. And I'm like, oh yes, I know how to do that. And so then it just kind of organically happened. And then I had a television show that was part of PBS where it was called High School Quiz Show, and it was helping young nerds see the power of their own stories to be smart and not be bullied for their intelligence. And I found that really compelling. So I was a host of that show. So I was commuting between here and Boston, and that show did really well. And then we won an Emmy for it. It's not mine. It's sitting in a glass case in WGBH.
It's a communal Emmy.
Yeah. So they send me pictures of it.
They send you a picture every once in a while. It's still there's a camera there
I
just
feel
to
like
check
a
on
bad
you.
parent. Like I don't have even like weekend custody of it. So that was really cool because it was really the story of how do you encourage young people to not be ashamed of being intelligent. And that's something that we're seeing in our society right now, which is the story of not hiding who you are. So there's this anti-intellectualism right now, which is if you're a regular person, that means you should hide your intelligence, or you should be anti-fact, or you should, reject things that, allow you to think. And so a lot of these kids were bullied, or they, like one kid was like, I was like, what do you do for fun? And he was like, I write Klingon operas. And I was like, that's really cool. How did you learn Klingon? And that was the first time anyone has ever said, that's really cool. Everyone else had said, you're dumb, or you're a nerd, or you're never gonna, meet anyone, or anything like that. And so that was really great to have a television show that told the story of these kids, and I got to be a part of it. So it was still about celebrating the nerd, which was the story arc of that.
That's awesome. And so you said, you'd been in that world, clearly successfully kind of telling stories, also doing shows, and then you've got now these corporations or companies coming and saying, oh, hey, come build this for us. What were they asking for, or what did you start to perceive their need for stories, and what were those holes that you were filling for them, or that perceived need, and what was some of the impact as you started to get more deeply involved in bringing that storytelling to them?
It started pretty simply. Like I just did a lot of random things. Like some things didn't work out at all. Like this is the point about failure. Like you just have to try a lot of things. So one time I was at the Mill Valley Public Library, and I like libraries. They're full of stories, and they were like, we have this small grant. Can you come and teach our population how to do some storytelling? And I was like, well, I'm not sure I'm the best person to do that. I know how to tell my own stories. And they're like, well, that's kind of an aging population. The library is their access point, and they really want to connect. And I was like, okay, I'll come up with something. So it was in their basement. I came up with a curriculum. Some people came in. Some people walked out. There was this like older lady who's like, I don't like this class. It's boring. And then she just left. And this other lady was like, it's snack time. And then she just walked out. It's like it wasn't even heckling. It was just like walking out. So I was like, oh man, why did I even do this? This is a waste of my time. So it was like, yeah, I don't know why I did that. But then I got an email a few weeks later, and it was someone who had taken the class, and I didn't even remember because I was so obsessed with the people who hated it. And he was like, hi, I'm an executive at North Face, and I happen to live in Mill Valley, and my wife and I are members of the library, and we go to all the events because, we love the library. And I just came to your storytelling workshop. You might not remember me. I'm the one who told this and this story. And I went back to my marketing team, and I basically shared with them the concepts that you talked about, what you do on stage, and how anyone can use these concepts in their own personal life and whatever they do. And he's like, could you come and help a corporate team use storytelling in their work? And by the way, it wouldn't be for North Face because I'm leaving and I'm going to Reebok. Can you travel? And I'm like, yes. Because I didn't even know what I was supposed to do. I just said yes. So basically, there was a hunger for what people are doing. And I think this is really what I think I realized as a former business person turned creative, which is creatives are really pushing the envelope, and then the business world kind of catches up. And creatives are really making these waves in society, and then the business world is like, oh, okay, that's what's going on, and then we incorporate these things. And so it took that person to be like, wow, I tried this stuff and it works. Can you come and help some more? So it's a real honor when someone values what creatives bring, and it's not just entertainment. It's really, this is how people communicate. This is value. This is the way that people emotionally connect to each other. This is how we sell. This is how we make it so that it's not just transactional. This is how we live.
That's great. And I know you probably can't go into details about exactly because you're under NDAs and things of that nature, but were there, you talked a little bit about the marketing groups, and were there particular groups that felt compelled, and what were they, potentially either trying to accomplish with storytelling and trying to, was it internally, was it for them, was it for how they talked about products to consumers? What were some of the key touch points where storytelling kind of came into play for them?
Yeah, in general, that opportunity kind of became larger because I worked with that team and then other teams within Reebok and then the parent company, Adidas. And what surprised me the most is I always thought it would be like consumer facing, like, oh yes, it makes sense for marketing, or oh, it makes sense for strategy. But I was really surprised when they said, our global HR divisions would like you to work with them. And I was like, well, I don't know anything about HR. I don't know anything about this. And they were like, well, we really need your help because HR is really considered transactional. And we are, we hire people, we send an offer letter, we help them move, we give them bonuses, we do this, but we don't have a lot of influence sometimes because we're viewed as transactional, and we want to have more stories, both in recruitment, both in the compelling nature of what we do. Can you work with our HR teams? And I said, that makes total sense. So storytelling is not just relegated to consumer facing, things like things that make us feel like, oh, a shoe, or oh, a product that we can eat. It's also any time that we want to influence or make people hear us, where it's not like, I want this from you, give it to me. Now CFOs need to tell better stories. So storytelling is not just about the shiny, exciting thing. It's like anyone who needs to influence in this new world, and we're past the point where you can just point at someone and be like, you do this for me because I'm your boss. That doesn't work anymore. So, maybe for some hierarchical organizations it works, but HR teams really need to start thinking about this because they're the touch points. And Adidas was having an incredible year. And I'm like, why are you trying to hire me? You're doing great in the market. Do you really need me? And they're like, yes, we need you internally because we're blowing up, but this is what we're looking at internally. We want you to work with our HR academy.
That's great. That's great. And without giving away your secret sauce of how but are there certain approaches that you take? How do you help kind of coax and distill the stories? So many people react to stories, we're constantly consuming stories, but a lot of people don't feel like good storytellers themselves. So how do you get a chance to kind of work and connect with those groups, whether they're in HR and marketing or wherever it may be, to help distill and coax that story out?
I think what I learned just being in the corporate environment for so long and being like a former engineer is that there's so much numbing that we do in this corporate environment, like that we can't, talk about our feelings because it's unprofessional. I don't mean like unprofessional, like, be like Elon Musk, and be just like out there and just do weird things like that. I don't mean like that kind of unprofessional. Just be like, we are supposed to just hide who we are as humans, or we're supposed to not have emotions or not be moved. And that is not how stories are created. And I think this creates bad narratives. This is why journalists don't like talking to companies sometimes. They're like, why would I want to tell your story? Because you're like telling me the story that's like, I'm doing great, our stock price is great, and next week it's going to be even better. Like that's not a good story. Like, who wants to hear that story? Like, it's just boring. So there has to be some risk, some vulnerability. And so we are trained to just keep failure so close to us. We're trained to keep any mistake hidden. We're trained to keep vulnerability just hidden from everyone. So I think the first thing is to just give permission to people to be like, how can you be human? How are you bringing your full self? And in some corporations, that's a risk. You can get fired for being your full self. And of course, they would not hire me because they know I'm a comedian, I'm a storyteller, I'm a risky person to bring in. But if they know who I am and they still hire me, I would be like, yeah, we're not going to just put a veneer and be like, this is a great company. Look how great we are. We have to really talk about the ebb and the flow. And so good storytelling, everyone knows, hero's journey, there's got to be stakes and conflicts. There's going to be, all of the things that we just know from consuming. Corporations haven't figured that out because the internal culture is about numbing and perfection and only showing one point of view. And so it's about erasing some of that or mitigating some of that and showing that it's actually not just good, but it can be great. So I would say that if maybe Mark Zuckerberg had shown more vulnerability rather than less, this is not exactly what happened, but when they're like, well, how do you feel about all this, data stuff and what happened and, security breaches, and he didn't say this, but I'm kind of being funny. They're like, how do you feel? And he's like, my feelings are in a sad place. Like, no one was like, oh, wow, he seems really contrite. Stock price tanked, right? So corporations think that if you take a risk and you're vulnerable, then bad things will happen. But if you don't come out and you really empathize, then people think you don't care about them. So I would say more emotion rather than less.
Interesting. Okay, that's great, because one of our values is be human, and part of this has always been about how do you kind of tell those stories, and authenticity, right, should come through in some of that. And this also leads me to one place where do stories and knowledge fit? Because if we think about knowledge, right, you kind of want to know both the things that worked well, like the shiny things, but also you just as important potentially are the things that didn't work well and the failures. And so one thing, and this is more just for us and just your thoughts in general, where does kind of storytelling and knowledge, institutional knowledge, come together? Or are they the same thing? Do you feel like they're delineated in any ways? Is stories just a form of knowledge? I don't know. Has it come up in your work where where people are like, okay, these stories that you're providing for us now, this is part of our knowledge or institutional memory? Or are they kind of fleeting, momentary things that hit people, create a behavior, and then kind of drift off? So,
yeah, I feel like there's so much information and so much knowledge that there's ways that we can access this knowledge. We can, build models. There's spreadsheets. There's different kinds of things. But how do we remember? How do we make it sticky? How do we internalize it so that we can take action on it? So if there's knowledge that's tied to a story, we will remember. We'll remember this story, and we'll remember, okay, how do we take action on it? And so associating it with an emotion or something that's has some texture to it is a good way of having people take action on something like that. So this is years ago, but I asked someone at Reebok why he worked there, and he worked in the headquarters, and I don't remember his name. I don't remember what town he's from, but it was like one of those like Natick, or they all kind of run together. But he was like, well, I actually worked in one of the retail stores, and I'd always wanted to work at Reebok. And I was like, but why? You could work at New Balance or Converse, like you could work at any of those places in Massachusetts. And he said, well, when I worked in the retail store, this woman came to the store and she had a bad back and a bad knee, and she was in a lot of pain. And she just was talking to me for half an hour, and my boss was like, why are you spending all this time with this one woman? And he was like, well, I don't know, she reminds me of my aunt, and she's in a lot of pain, and she was telling me she couldn't find the right shoe, and I just spent a lot of time with her, and I asked her about her arch support, and he knew a lot of knowledge about the shoes and about the specifics. and he finally sold her something. And then she came back, 6 to 8 months later, and she's like, I was able to go for a walk, and I feel so much better because I was not doing any exercise, and this has got me walking, and I feel great, and I want to get another pair of shoes, but I think I'm ready to kind of pick up the pace, and I think I want to do more. And so they had a relationship, and he literally saw her, go from like this aunt kind of character who was in pain and chronic pain, mobility issues, and through this kind of relationship, he wasn't selling, he was educating and giving her knowledge. And then he was compelled, and he applied to work at Reebok, and he was rejected like 2 or 3 times, and then he finally applied, and he was hired into the global marketing team. And so I think that knowledge plus that story, like I said, I don't remember his name. I don't remember which retail store he worked at. I don't even remember what city he's in. But I don't even remember the model of the shoe he sold her. But I remember that emotional connection, that he spent so much time with her, this person with chronic pain, that someone would be like, oh, middle-aged woman, she's in a lot of pain, she's probably complaining, just get her out the door. But he was like, I want to take time with her. And so he has a brand connection, and now she has a brand connection. And so that's the kind of knowledge plus story that creates a compelling narrative for both why you want to work there and also why you have a connection to the product.
I love that. It feels like storytelling as a vehicle for knowledge. So one question before we open it up for questions: are there brands or organizations that you look at now and that are doing a great job of kind of embracing storytelling as part of what they do, either internally or externally? Are there some that kind of come to top of mind, or we should take a look at some point?
Well, this is cliche to say right now, but Nike is obviously, they took a huge risk. And this is why part of storytelling is taking a risk. I have tried to tell jokes on stage. I've tried to tell stories on stage. Sometimes the audience doesn't laugh. Sometimes the story falls flat. Sometimes I'm like, wow, that didn't work out. I need to go back and restructure it. With anything that has human emotion or a connection, you're not going to get it perfect. It's not an equation. It's not like integrating a function. So you're not going to get it perfect. So there's always an element of risk. So when Nike decided to celebrate their campaign with Colin Kaepernick, I'm sure people in their legal department, I'm sure they had tons of people internally that were like, we're taking a huge risk. People are going to walk away. People are going to burn their shoes. Some wearing their shoes are going to burn themselves. But I'm sure that there was so much pushback. But they were like, we want to do this because we see that there's like, this is in line with what we're doing. And the ad is great. It's a compelling story. It's not just about him. It's about a lot of different kinds of people. And it's really paid off for them. And it's very interesting because I think you've got to take these risks in order to know what works. Sometimes it's not going to work. So I think that's a fascinating example because I wouldn't have thought that they would have taken that risk. I would think that that's not necessarily in line with their values. They're not kind of so risk tolerant. So I was surprised.
That's great. No, that's a great example. Very top of mind. I just wanted to open it up for questions now for folks. Anybody have any particular questions? Mark? I know he's been dying there. He's sitting there waiting.
No, it's been one of the best, one of the better fireside chats that we've had.
Oh, I went from
sure.
best to better. I got downgraded.
Same thing.
Anna?
Yeah, I was going to say, with HR departments, are they kind of hesitant when you come on board, not because of you, but because of maybe they're not super comfortable with being creative because they are in HR, or just because it is something that is new for them? Are they hesitant? Are they excited? What's been your experience?
Yeah, that is a tension slash struggle. I find that if people feel like they're in the room, if someone decides, hey, it's good to bring Dhaya in, and we're all excited for her to be here at the highest levels, then it goes pretty well. But if even there's a few people who are hesitant, like, why do we need this? If there's some doubt in the room, it makes it harder for me to get to the why. So I never want to be in a position to tell people how to do their job well. I just want to help people to be like, where is it difficult for you? Or how can I be helpful? So rather than being like, you're doing something wrong, or you're not doing it well enough. So kind of really starting from what's challenging and how can I be helpful, or how can storytelling be helpful. Sometimes they bring me in because someone has said, generically, we want to be more of a storytelling culture. Go. And they're like, well, what does that mean? And so that's not anyone's fault. It's just someone has said that at an executive level, and then they're left scrambling, and then they're like, well, Dhaya can help, and then they're like, we don't know what this is. I don't even know. And so it makes it very challenging. And so the best thing that I can do is really explain what I do, how this can be helpful, where their pain points are, and just really offer this as a sense of how can we work together rather than they've done anything wrong. And so it can be slow, but if there's people who are hesitant in any way, yes, it is challenging.
You mentioned during your talk the hero's journey, like Joseph Campbell. I'm interested in what you're reading right now, or any sort of like surprising sources to help influence your work.
I'm reading something that might not even be relevant. I'm reading a meditation book called Awakening Joy. I don't know if anyone has been to Spirit Rock. Has anyone ever? Okay, so I think it's really, really interesting. It's about how sometimes meditation can get this bad reputation about you just sit there and like do nothing, and you're just like thoughts, breathing, breath, and it's like really boring. It just seems the opposite of what I do on stage, or I'm all about excitement and laughter and connecting with people. But it's really about like finding moments of joy, like, oh wow, there's that like chocolatey cookie that's right there and it's half eaten, so I've got a shot at it, something like that. So it's really about finding joy in everyday moments. And when people come to me and they say, you know what, I don't have any stories, or sometimes I'll even be like, well, let's think about when you were growing up. Do you have any stories about growing up? And they're like, I had a really shitty childhood. I'm sorry, can I not say shitty?
Fine.
Okay, I had a really shitty childhood or something like that. And I'm like, oh wow, that really sucks. So let's not talk about that. So some people are really blocked in finding any stories to tell, whether it's work or personal or brand or anything. And so I find that the only way to get better at storytelling is to practice. And so finding any way to create these small moments, or small moments of joy, or small micro stories, and then kind of build on them is one way to kind of practice that muscle. So so I'm really excited about this idea of like micro moments or micro stories.
That's great.
Oh,
Elliot?
Go for it, Ellie.
Yeah, I'm curious about the tools that you use both to capture and investigate stories, and also share. When you get to a company, are there certain things you ask for, like, hey, I want this, or I want to talk to these people, or I want to see pictures or videos? And then when you are kind of leaving a company, is there a way that you normally like to leave kind of the story that you've co-created with them?
I swear I didn't plant that question. That was really- Good job.
I'm very inspired by what you all are doing, because I don't work so much in the medium of video or kind of any visual form, just kind of in the basic, static, because that's not my form. So I'm really inspired by what you all are doing, and hopefully down the line we can overlap or collaborate in some way. Like I mentioned, my dad is a physicist, and growing up he said physics is the basic science. If you know physics, you can do anything else. And I'm like, really, anything? And he says yes. So he's never taken our car into the shop. He fixes the car himself. If the toaster breaks, he fixes it. He taught my mom how to cook, because she didn't know how to cook when they got married. He hems the pants in the family. He irons. He thinks that physics has enabled him to do all of that, which that's great. That's fantastic. I don't know if that's true or not, but so I feel like I am kind of like that, and then I think I've boiled storytelling down to a very basic way, which I host the Moth in San Francisco, and so all of you are welcome to come. I host the Moth the last Tuesday of the month in San Francisco, unless I'm traveling, and then I have a sub. And there's another Moth in Berkeley. I don't host that one unless I'm subbing, but usually I have room for 4 people on my guest list. And then if you don't get on my guest list, you have to pay, but I'll get you in some other time. So I've boiled it down to its essential elements, and so it's basically like a person with a microphone and an audience telling a story in 5 minutes. And so no matter who I come across, like a journalist who's writing a book about tuberculosis, I'm like, come to the Moth. If you can tell that story in 5 minutes and it fits with the theme, you cut out the fat, you get to the core of what that story is, and you're in front of a live audience, and you have to keep their attention. And you can't, just wander. And you can't kind of give them a thesis topic. Like, my story today is about tuberculosis. I would like to thank my editor for being here today. No, cut through all that bullshit. Just get to the story. So it's kind of, that's the way that I think about approaching it. Like, if someone tries to say, tries to give me all this extra stuff, I just want to get right to what their fundamental story is. And one of the models that I really like is the Simon Sinek why model. And so he uses it a lot for leadership and marketing, but I met him and I go, hey, I'm not trying to steal your stuff. Can I use it for storytelling if I give you credit? He goes, yeah, take it. Just use it for whatever, because he makes a lot of money doing it. So I always talk about the why model, and I'm like, why are you even telling this story? What's the why? What's your why? What's their why? Because if you're just telling it for no reason, it doesn't make any sense. So I like to boil it down to the essential elements. And if it strays away from that, then you're doing something else. And I don't know what that something else is, like PR or flexing, or I don't know what it is, but that's kind of what informs me, is the performative element and the why.
What else?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was mentioning I've seen your stand-up, and I remember that night, and I remember you because you really stood out from the rest of the comedians. You kept your set super clean, and it was really smart. And I was wondering, that's part of your brand story, and if that's evolved, and how do you help companies evolve their brand stories?
I didn't really think about being super clean as a strategy, because I feel like with my friends, I'll talk about different things and like have a potty mouth or whatever. But some of my favorite comedians, are like Chris Rock. he swears on stage, you know, like different comedians like go there and they're great. But I feel like whenever I've tried to be like super dirty, it's like a toddler trying on their mom's clothes. Like they're like, she's cute. Oh my gosh, that's adorable. She's swearing. Like, and then they just laugh and they think like this like cute little girl is trying to, it's like, so it almost doesn't fit in some way, but I feel like, but nerdy fits me. And so like I kind of like to call it like social justice swearing. Like I think being like fuck the police sounds better coming from me than like, yeah, like these people were fucking all night, you know, like that, you know, like it's like one is more on brand for me than the other, you know. So so it wasn't like a thing that I was thinking about. It was just like with stand-up or storytelling, you know right away what works, and the audience tells you right away. Like, you know, they don't fill out a comment card. They're like, ha ha, or no. So, and then in terms of smart or not smart, I didn't really set out to try to be, I just didn't want to hide, you know, that I had a brain. Like I was so upset that I saw so many girls being like, I can only be taken seriously if I'm pretty, or I can only be taken seriously if I self-deprecate, or if I can only be taken seriously if somehow I talk about how fat I am, or you know, whatever. And there are some comedians who do that really well, and it's great. And but for me, I'm like, it almost hurts me because I'm like, why are you so beautiful and so smart and so talented and you don't see that? And so for me, I'm like, I can't go up and bash on myself because there's enough people willing to do that to me just walking out into the street. So I'm like, I'm pretty great. So, you know, and so I would rather bash on society and punch up rather than punch down at myself or punch down on oppressed communities or punch down on people who are already being oppressed or victimized. So that was just, it was just a value for me to not partake in that because it just felt abusive and hurtful to be able to have my stand-up be used as a tool to be a weapon against people, including myself.